Well, here, I have it recorded now. So anyway, what I was gonna kind of start off with was, yeah, just explaining that Microsoft PowerPoint is probably one of the more straightforward programs in the Microsoft suite. It has a lot of the same sort of features, and then progressing through it, I think, is one of the more intuitive ones because I think it works more for someone who has kind of a visual sort of imagination. And ultimately, what PowerPoint is it's about storytelling in a way. You come up with some message that you want to convey to your audience, and then you build this visual and textual and auditory story around it to help convey that message. And if you kind of approach it from that direction, I think that always works the best when you're trying to put together a presentation. And so today I kind of want to talk about just sort of the overview of almost more of the things that you want to do before you really get started. And as we talk about each of these, I'll go into it a little bit, and the classes throughout the rest of this series will go into them really more deeply and more, this is kind of the broad view, and then it'll be a little more focused. So when you're working on a PowerPoint, one of the first things that you really want to do is just be prepared going into it and have that storytelling mindset. Um, it's kind of like the analogy of you wouldn't build a house without a blueprint. You want to have all the plans put in place, all that framework set up for yourself before you start actually hammering things together and building the presentation itself. And so what I'll show you right now is something cool in PowerPoint that you get to do, and you get to add all these new slides. And normally what I would do when I'm starting a presentation, if I have the time and I want to have a really finessed sort of thing, is I'll have, just a big sheet of paper and a pen. Usually I have like all different colored pens, and I just draw out all the different ideas, all the things that I want to put into the presentation. And it's pretty abstract and loose, but it gives a general sense of where I want it to go. And it helps me also when I'm thinking about the design, because the visual side of PowerPoint is, I think, where you have the most fun and flexibility. So when I'm doing this, after I've kind of put all those ideas on paper, I sort of start building a framework for it. And when you put in slides in PowerPoint, most of the time you'll do it from the Home tab. You might think maybe Insert because you're inserting a new slide, but it is the Home tab. And the second section in it says Slides, and this is where you do all of that. And you can go to this New Slide option. If you click the picture, it'll make just a random new slide. It kind of intuitively makes this slide that has a title and a content area. Or you can use the little drop down, and it's a little more specific. You can, this is their default, but you can also have it with the header underneath, or you can have multiple contents. This one, it sets it up so you have these two little comparison boxes, and you might have one that just has a title only. The original title slide comes in and it has this big space for a title, this little space for a subtitle. So maybe you'd put the presentation and then who it is who's presenting. And there's all different versions of this, content with a caption, and then there's just blank. There's nothing. You have to start kind of from scratch on that one. And when you're working with these slides, not only can you add them from this button, what you can also do is you can duplicate them. There's an option here, right down at the bottom, duplicate selected slides. And that works too. So right now 6 is selected, so I would be creating another copy that looks exactly the same. If I had content on here before, it would have copied that as well. All the formatting would have stayed the same. And this works also from this panel over here, which you can collapse or expand. You can make it bigger if you want to see a little more clearly what's going on. Make it smaller if you're not too worried about it. And these are also kind of draggable content. So let me put some words on a couple of these. We'll just name them very generically. First slide, second slide, just so that you can see them a little bit better on the edge. And we'll make this a little bit bigger so you can see it too. So if we're looking at these, not only can I add slides by clicking and putting in a new slide, I can also rearrange them. Let's say I want to move this around. I can just take it and drag it, and you'll see it moves them around for me. And you can do this in any way that you want. You can have this smaller and scroll down and get all the way to the bottom if you want. So I can pull this back up to the top. Another way you can do this is all the copy paste features that you would use in other Microsoft software work here too. So I can right click a slide and I can cut it, I can copy it. I could then click in this empty space right here and then paste it. Obviously I don't have anything selected, so it doesn't give me that option, but that's how you would do that. You can also from here duplicate the slide or delete it. Those are both useful too. Adding a section has it has specific uses. When you're making kind of a more finalized presentation, it's helpful to say, okay, these are maybe my introduction slides. You can even have a loop that's going continuously at the beginning of the presentation, and you'd make that its own separate section. And you can put links so that you can click between your sections a little more easily if that's something that you're trying to do in a presentation. And we'll go into that a little bit more. You also get a little bit of formatting options through these. You could reset this back to its default if you had put in a lot of formatting changes. You can change the layout from here. Maybe I want 2 content instead of 1. It'll keep what I had already typed in, but it'll add another section for me. So that can be pretty helpful, just kind of navigating the slides over there. And kind of going back to that idea of preparing your presentation, this is also a helpful place to work with that information. Usually when you start a presentation, you really want to know, first of all, what is going to be your beginning of the presentation. And I'll delete a few slides so that we don't have so many going on. Once again, you can highlight multiple slides at once. I'm going to hit Control and then click, and now it's selecting all 3 of those. I'll hit the delete key, and now they're gone. So looking at these, we'll change this to look back that title content. Oops, I hit new slide, so you notice that didn't quite work the way I intended. You got to go to this layout option if you're trying to change a slide you already have selected. Boop, there we go. So that makes a little more sense. We'll call this one the end. And this middle section is really where most of the presentation can be flexible and has a lot of dynamics to it. But you always want to make sure that you capture where it's going in the beginning and really conclude it in the end. And it's once again back to that story idea. And when you start having lots of things going on in the middle, I'm going to duplicate some slides so that we know these are all part of the same sort of section. If you have a lot going on and you're trying to plan out how you want to order these, you can use this tool down at the bottom. There's several different views. If you look in the bottom right, you can see this Notes tab. This comes more in handy when you're trying to explain what you want to say when you give the presentation itself. If I open this little bar appears. I can expand it and I can type in here. And this becomes different things that I get to have available to me as the presenter that I can see, but the people to whom I'm presenting don't. So I see it when I'm giving the talk, but you wouldn't see it as I was presenting it. So if I were to switch this to a slideshow, unfortunately, this doesn't quite work as well in Zoom because I have to make this the new shared screen. So right now you're probably still seeing it the way I would be as the presenter, but I could click on this and this is what you would see as the presentation. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Zoom makes that a little tricky to demonstrate. So anyway, you can hide those notes as well. Go back to the bottom, click that little button there. Comments, that's usually useful if someone else is kind of annotating this presentation for you. They're giving you some kind of feedback. And the rest of these options have to do with how you're viewing it yourself. This is kind of the default. You get to see the notes at the bottom, the whole list of slides on the side, and then the main slide that you're selecting in the middle of your screen. But this next one, this is called Slide Sorter. This lets you move things around a little bit more easily. And my mouse has disappeared, and that's a little unfortunate. Wow, I've never had that happen before. Something about while I was moving around, it disappeared. That's funny. It's back now. Weird. Sometimes Zoom and PowerPoint don't seem to be friends. But this allows you to move content around, so while you're brainstorming, you can shift things about and see it in a little bit more of a structured way. And I'll show kind of a different example of that right here. This is something that I'm in the middle of brainstorming, working on some content for the website for our new seed library that's coming out. So this is something where I might be able to say, okay, I want people to know about our events earlier on. I'll put that here, and it helps you work out the presentation that way. So we'll go back to the other one that we're playing with here. This is actually right there. So many things open. This next one, this is called the reading view. I don't usually find it helpful too much, but it shows once again what your audience would see while you're presenting. So you can always hit escape to get out of this too. So you could click, or you could just hit escape. And this is the slideshow itself. And this is where if I were to click on, it starts the show from wherever you have selected, unless by default you have up here, start from beginning. The shortcut to that is F5, and that will take you always back to the main slide. But if we were to start, this is what it would look like. Which actually, Colette, I'd appreciate knowing, can you see this at the moment? What does it look like to you?
That one, it's just, it says, welcome to Microsoft PowerPoint.
Okay, so it did bring up the slide itself.
Yep.
Interesting. So you do get to see what I see.
Yeah.
So Zoom has a funny feature, thank you for that, where you could escape out of your PowerPoint without all the people watching your Zoom session see it, and I've only ever played with it that way. So I didn't know if this would work, so that is good to know. So you go through all of your middle to the end, and then it gives you this black screen at the end of your presentation to let you know that you're done. You can either hit, what I'm doing is I'm hitting the arrow keys on my keypad to navigate through these. So I'm going left arrow, right arrow, right arrow. And you can also use up arrow, and up really doesn't work too, yeah, something has gone awry. But that's just because there's a bunch of middle slides. So up and down works as well. You can also click through with your mouse. Clicking also will work. And to get out, just the escape key. So these are little shortcut keys that are helpful to know to navigate through. And they're kind of the basics of working through your presentation.
Was that F5 that put you on that screen that you were just showing me? Is that how you got there?
Yeah, so F5 is going to be starting the presentation from the beginning slide, always from the first one. So if I hit F5 on my computer, this is where it takes me, even though I maybe have this middle slide selected.
Oh, I see. Okay, perfect.
So that does that. And the slideshow itself, I want to say is F4. Let me see. I'll click on this middle slide. I'm not sure which one it is. There's definitely a shortcut key to get to play from the current slide. If I hover over, it's Shift F5. There we go. That's something handy. If you know where a button is, you can always hover over the button to find the shortcut, usually in Microsoft. And while we're here on the slideshow tab, this is another way to do it as well. So there's a bunch of different ways to play your slideshow. You can use the shortcut, F5, play from current slide, Shift F5, and then you can also click this slideshow button down at the bottom, or go up to the top ribbon, go to slideshow, and here you have a lot of different options. You can do from the beginning, from current slide. This presents it as a link. This is a little bit complicated and I've never actually used it myself personally. This is a custom slideshow. This is um, an interesting way of creating a different version of your slideshow um, from, once again, those sections that you can put in earlier on when we were in this view and we were looking at it here. So maybe halfway through there's an intermission. So I would add a section and we can title that. We can hide it. What I was trying to do, if I can open it, rename it. There we go. So we would call this intermission. And then you could modify the slideshow to maybe play only to the intermission or afterwards. And this is helpful if you have it kind of automated in a way using animations and transitions. So these are features that help you kind of navigate the way it presents to your audience. And in a similar sort of way, when you're using a presentation, you can hide slides so that they're still in your queue on the edge, but your audience won't see it when you present. So maybe there's a slide that for some reason it wasn't working or a link wasn't working and you're just going to skip it when you present it, then you could just hide it. And you can see the 5 is crossed out, and that lets you know that that one is not going to be seen in the presentation. Rehearse timings has to do a lot with if you have this set up as an automated process so that you don't have to click through your own slides. Maybe you know it'll take you exactly 15 seconds to go through this slide. You can set that up on a timer so it'll do it on its own. I've never had great luck with this, but usually that's probably because I haven't prepared the presentation well enough in advance to really have it down. But if maybe I was giving a great TED talk, then this is something that I would want to set up. So this is a lot about kind of navigating the show itself. And we have our other tabs, our insert, design, transition, and animations up here, which really are where you get to customize what the presentation looks like and really how it feels. And you can start, you can even start with a presentation that looks a certain way if that is helpful for you. Sometimes it's a little distracting. I like to kind of work with something that's pretty blank and basic and then get the content idea that I want and then fill it out with whatever graphics and designs that I want it to have. And when I get to that point, you can see from, it's the design tab, they have all of these default themes. And this can be a good place to start. If I open this up, I can hover over any of these and it'll give a look to each of the slides. And they're all a little different. And even within each of these, they have more customization options, which is pretty cool. So if I were to go something like this one's pretty basic. It only has really a detailed image on the front slide, the title slide. But even within here, it has its variants. So maybe I wanted a different color scheme. I could click that. I can also change it more from here. Say I liked the way, maybe I liked the way this one looked, but I didn't like the font style. I could say, okay, I actually want this to be in some sort of blue color scheme, or maybe this grayish orange one. That one, I'm not really sure why I would want that, but maybe that's what I want. We'll click on this blue-green one.
Where did you find that
So,
drop down?
oh yeah, so this is under design, and design gives us themes and then variants. Themes are kind of the more general version, and then variants let you change within those themes.
Yeah, and then the color drop down menu that you were just showing,
Yeah,
the font, where did you find that?
so that when I'm in variants, there's these little arrows here. Most variants, there's only 4, so you don't actually get to scroll through many. But then there's this other arrow. You
Oh,
can
I
click
see it.
that,
Yep.
and now you have these other drop downs. and each one has its own set. You can also customize any of these. So from fonts, maybe you wanted your own custom font. You can click there and you can tell it exactly what you want. You can say, okay, for this heading, I want maybe Times New Roman. I'm going to just type it instead of scrolling down through. And maybe for the body, maybe something similar but different, maybe Georgia font. We'll hit OK and save. And it calls this custom one. So now if we look in our fonts, we can see that we are using this custom setting that we've created. And it changes it around a little bit for us. And sometimes you want a slide to look a particular way, but you don't want all the slides to look like that. So maybe we like this for the title slide, but we're not ready for that for all the rest of them. We also, from this option, have Format Background, which we can click on, and it brings up this little toolbar. I got to move my little zoom preview camera there so I can actually see this. But from here, what you get are a lot of different options to format it yourself within it. You don't have to even select those specific variants. You can maybe hide the background graphics. This one I've seen folks use a lot. And now you can see it just has that, that green circle sort of background image. We can turn it back on, but it's part of the whole graphics that are in that theme. That's how that one works. We could just change it here. We could maybe say, I want to go back, have a solid fill, and I want it white again. Okay, so why did, oh, because I gave it no color. There we go. Sometimes the no fill and the white look very much the same, so that can be a little challenging. But you can make this whatever you want. Gradient fill is a really pretty and simple option. The picture or texture fill, sometimes it's a little bit much. And a trick to do with this is to make it a little more transparent. So if we were to do something like that, now it's a little bit more subtle. Or you could overlay it with another image and use that to kind of dull it out a little bit so it's easier to read your text behind it. And pattern fill is the same sort of thing. It's a little bit more graphical. Sometimes this can be a lot. I can see why this would be a distracting sort of background. But once again, you could dull it or maybe just make it an accent for your slide. So let's say we went to that solid fill, we just wanted it white, and we only wanted black text on this slide. What we can do is, now that this is white, we can close that up. Let's try to find some text here. Make that black again. Bloop. Okay, there we go. Click there. I'm right-clicking to bring up these options. So there we go. So now it knows that this is all black, and maybe I want all the rest of the slides to look like this. What I can do is, there's a tool called the Format Painter. It's up here, and I always put it on my ribbon up top just because I think it's really handy to have available all the time in PowerPoint. And you can access it from Home. Format Painter's here next to Cut, Copy, and Paste. In the Format Painter, what I can do is click on the slide itself, select that, and then click another slide. And you might say, well, that didn't change it at all. And that is true. And so what has happened here is that all of its background graphics are still in effect. So we could go to that Design tab again, and we could either say, go to that Format Background and get rid of the background graphics and then have to change the font again. Or what we could do is apply this to it. And now it applied that to all of the slides. So let's hit Control Z, and let's try, I'm trying to remember exactly how to do this. Format background, there's a way to apply this to all. So we'll hit Apply to All. And unfortunately, it didn't change the colors either. I was hoping that would change with it. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to work with, and luckily Control Z is a great way to just go back, and you'll see we can go through everything. We can also just drop down, go back through all those customizations, and say, okay, we can switch this around. And here we'll format background, apply to all again. And now it's fixed it back for us. This is always kind of the default right here, the second option in. So if you need to go back, that's one way to do it. And when we're looking at this, if you want to have one that has its own, this is where you'd probably want to select it and apply it to just have its own format. And this is different in this version of PowerPoint than the one I'm used to working in. So all these formatting options look a little bit differently. But I think if I right click this, there we go. There's the option. It says apply to selected slide. So that's where I could do that. So now we just have it going one at a time. So that's a way to fix that. It's a little bit easier to add it just one as opposed to just trying to do them all at once. But if you want them all to match, then it makes sense to apply it to all of them. And so then this one, once again, if I were to do that, it'll automatically set it to all of them. Maybe I just want this one green. Here I could once again right click, apply to selected slide. And I could select multiple slides at once. I could click this, then hit Control and click a bunch of other ones and say, okay, all of these ones are going to go back to that default formatting. There we go. This is what I was trying to show you before, and I was on the struggle bus for a minute. I appreciate your patience with the live demonstrations here. So once you've kind of gone through all of this and you've thought, okay, I know who my audience is, I know what colors they're going to like, what's going to appeal to them, then you can go through and start really adding things to the slides themselves. And some of them have this handy option, this box, that lets you insert the content directly from the box itself. I'm going to close the Format Background tab, make it a little bigger here. So you can insert things from files or from just copying and pasting them in, and that often works best. Something that is helpful to do is to kind of get a collection of images and ideas that speak to your subject and speak to your audience and have them somewhere separately on your computer that you can access pretty easily. Most of the presentations that I work with have a file folder with the presentation and all these other files that are thrown in there with content that's going to be going into the presentation, which you don't necessarily have to do that. From the Insert tab, you can also access any of these little quick links here. You can see some of the same symbols appearing up top. But you can also add different things. You can add word art the same way you would in Microsoft Word. Same thing with these equations and symbols, any of these different tools. Screen recording's pretty fun. If I was, say, doing this presentation outside of Zoom, this is how I would do this. I would make a recording of something on my computer from my screen, and then I can insert it into the slide from here. And we have a class later on that'll really go into adding the audio and video components to slides. But just kind of going through some basic images. Later versions of PowerPoint like this one have access to online pictures. So you can click on this, and most of these are pictures that you can tell it you only want pictures in the Creative Commons. So maybe I want some photographs of, we're talking about PowerPoint, so maybe about just presentations in general. So I'd type that in. It uses Bing by default. Hit enter, and it'll pop up all of these Creative Commons images. And any of these you can select and put into the PowerPoint. So if I were to click on this, I can also click more than one if I want to see them both. And then I'd hit insert, it would download it, and it would bring it into the file. The same thing would work if I wanted to use a picture from my computer. I could click Insert Pictures. I was doing once again, some work for the seed library, so maybe I want to have this picture of squash, different gourds. I'll hit Insert, and it'll work the same way. And these pictures can be formatted just like any other pictures in the Microsoft Suite. You can remove backgrounds if they have a white background that you want to get rid of to give them some transparency. You can do different things with the brightness and the contrast through the corrections, as well as the sharpness of the image. This just increases the contrast um, around lines. So when you're working in a photograph, what that would do is, we'll see, it just makes the image look a little bit more crisp. It highlights those high contrast areas. Color does the same sort of thing. You can change the saturation. Going all the way up, it's really vibrant. Go all the way down, it's a black and white. Changing the tone a little bit, making it warmer or cooler, depending on what you want. And then if you're going for a particular tone, you can say, okay, this is something that would work for that. Notice it has that weird blue background. This is where removing a background might be helpful. In this case, this is a picture that's already been formatted, so it's trying to figure out where that edge is. And I could say this, and okay, it's trying to kind of make a line there. And it's highlighting out in purple the parts that it thinks are part of the background. So I want to know that this is also still part of it. And it's not going to be perfect, but it'll be kind of a good demo of what this would look like. If I hit Keep Changes, now you can see it has gotten rid of most of the background, but I'd have to work with it a little bit more to keep that edge there. On the same sort of idea, you can crop the pictures that you want to put in. Maybe we decide, okay, I don't want any of that beveling or cropping, excuse me, any of that beveling or formatting there, and I'll just crop that out and make it a smaller image. Bloop. You can move these dark black bars until it's the size that you want. And then you can either click crop again, and that'll get you out of the crop option, or hit enter, whoops, or click outside. And those are all options to get that crop selection that you want. And we could go back and change the color again, go back to its original if we wanted. You can also change some of the artistic effects. This is a little just different. Sometimes this might be interesting if you're creating a background for a slide. So maybe this is going to be part of your slide's background. We'd want to resize it. Can make it huge, crop it again. You want to be a little careful when you scroll within slides, because if you scroll down far enough, it'll just take you to the next slide. So we'll hit crop. I'll scroll down a little. And PowerPoint's handy in the sense that it usually will snap, and you can see underneath it a little bit. There's that transparency there, so you can see where the bottom of the slide is. So if I do that, it's just a little bit off. I'll make it a little bit bigger, cover up the whole slide. And then this is a little bit much. Also, it's too far forward. You can adjust where this picture sits with these backward and forward buttons. So I can click those, send it forward, click this, send it backward, and now that title's in front of it again. And another thing that's handy with this that I'll sometimes do if I want a picture but it's a little too much is I'll insert a shape. And in this case, it makes sense to use a rectangle. I'll make it the full size of the slide, and I'll make it black. And then what I can do from the formatting of this, so I'll click this panel because that makes it a little easier to see. To format the slide, what I can do is change the transparency. And now I have sort of that idea of this weird painted vegetable in the background, but it's not taking up the whole slide. And I could also change the color. Maybe I'm like, oh, the black's a little hard to see. Maybe we make it white, and we could go a little bit like that, something. Close that out. And once again, we'd want to send it backward. so that we'd have our fonts in front, but it just makes for an interesting sort of background. This is another way to customize a texture too. So if we were to look at this as the presentation itself, now we don't see those kind of messy edges. We don't have to crop it exactly. It'll crop automatically to the presentation space. So that's one way to kind of format a background if you're at that stage of your project. Another thing when you're working on these, they kind of automatically set it up to do bullet points, which sometimes is useful. Sometimes that's what you want, but it can also encourage folks to type a lot. And something that definitely happens is if you have a lot of text on your slide and you're speaking and your words aren't the same as what you have on your slide, people are really only doing one or the other. They're not going to be able to read and listen at the same time. And it's a little bit strange to have exactly what you're saying up on your slide. So the bullet points kind of suggest like just a few words, just a few ideas, and spend most of the presentation speaking through them. Maybe that's a key word in what you're saying, but it's your words that are giving the life to that element of the story, because it's really hard to just read a block of text. I can actually show an example here of a presentation that I did not have nearly enough time to put together, and so I ended up with an awful lot of text. This is a really busy, complicated slide that I am not proud of, but I did not have time to really rehearse it and go through it, so I just needed all of this up at once. And all of these were links that people could click on after, so that was handy, I suppose, but not necessarily the best thought through. So we'll go back here. So anyway, with that kind of in mind, when you're designing your presentation, you want to make sure that everything sort of flows together. Whether it be your formatting, your words on the slide, or your words that you're speaking, they all kind of match. And the backgrounds and the themes are a good way to sort of tie this together, to make sure the visual components match the spoken and textual components. Because ultimately, when you're working in a slide, you want to show more than you tell, but sometimes it's hard to show something that's really concise. So something else that you are able to do is put in other features like your charts and graphs, and you can import these directly from Excel if you wanted, right here, for instance, or you can build them while you're in there. We can hit OK. Let's see what that does. And now you can see it gives this kind of little pop out of Excel where you can put together your chart and your information. And a bar chart is kind of a good way to show information in a PowerPoint slide. It's not too complicated, but there are other charts that are definitely a little bit challenging for a slideshow if you have a lot of complex data. So if you had a really detailed scatter plot, that would be really hard to work with. But a pie chart or a bar chart, those both work pretty well usually. And as well as when you're doing this, something that's handy, you can get rid of content if you have these boxes and you don't want them. They work in much the same way as you would kind of expect. You can just select it so that the whole box is outlined. You'll see the dots. If you're selected in it, the text little cursor appears. But if you just select the box itself, you get a solid line and no cursor. Then you can just hit the delete key. So that can be a handy way to do this. You can also right click, and this gives you the option to cut, copy, paste. Sometimes there's a delete option. This time there isn't. You could use cut to delete it and then just never paste it. And that is an option as well. So we'll go through, delete. You can resize things just like you might in another program by pulling on those corners. You can move it around as long as you have this little 4-arrow mouse icon. And PowerPoint's fun because it has these little snap tools. So it is telling me where the center is as soon as I have it lined up, which is really quite useful. If I want it dead in the center, so right now it's making a snap line for the bottom of my heading, which maybe I want, maybe I don't. As soon as I go a little bit off, it gets rid of it. And then once it's there, you can also use the arrow keys to move it around. So if I wanted to just move it a little bit, right now it was running through a selection. As long as I have the whole thing selected, I guess charts are a little bit harder. Maybe a picture would be a better example of this. See, it'll snap it right there to the center. I can move it around just a little by holding down the arrow keys or just tapping them ever so slightly. That's another way to move around images in your slide. And just like in Word, you can also adjust the centering if it's a text item. You can either select in the text, highlight it, doesn't matter. It'll just do the whole area. If you have multiple lines, then you would have to select all of it if you wanted all of them to follow this formatting. But you can click any of these options to center it. If you want it over on the right for some reason, the center seems like a reasonable place. And if it gets really complicated, sometimes it's a little hard to work with. So right now, if I want to change that picture from behind, I'd have to move this around and then work on it from back there. That's a little bit challenging. So what I can do is I'm going to hit Control Z. Actually, what I think I'll do, I'll click this, I'll click. I'm thinking how best to do this. I haven't done it in a little while. If I click two things together, I can do what's called grouping them. And what grouping them does is it makes them one item for a moment in time. And interestingly, it's not letting me do that right now. I'm not sure exactly why, but usually it allows this. I mostly work in 365, so this is why I'm a little bit confused by what is happening here. Nonetheless, an example of this would be in this chart. These are all grouped together. So as I click around, I can move the chart all together all at once, and it moves the title and the series and the bars all at once. If I were to ungroup this, then they would move independently, and that wouldn't be what I want. And I think they have a block in place so that I can't do that, but I can resize different elements independently. So there's a little bit of modification that can happen there. So let me try here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a couple shapes. I'm going to insert just a little rectangle. Bloop. You can just draw it in like you would. Blue is fine. Notice it brings up this formatting tab where I can make all those changes, sending it backward or forward. Let's insert another shape, this time a circle. And let's see if it'll let these two be grouped together. See, these two it'll let me group. I'm not sure why it wouldn't on the others, but I can always look into that and find out. And now it'll let me move them together, let me resize them together. Notice it's not keeping that, that aspect ratio. I can undo that, hit Control Z, and if I hold Shift, then it will keep the aspect ratio. It won't distort the circle into an oval. So just another handy tool when you're working with images. And sometimes, and I was hoping to show it on these two in particular, because if you can group things together that become your background, then you can move your background a little more easily. You don't inadvertently select one thing without the other. Yeah, I'm not sure. It might have to do with the fact that this is an image and this is a picture. That would be my best guess. Let's see if it'll let me do two pictures together. No, I'm guessing it's the picture that is throwing it off. So it would appear that you can only select shapes to group together. which I've seen used in some pretty interesting ways. I watched someone who made an animation where all their different shapes were representing atoms and they were combining in different ways throughout their presentation to explain how chemical changes were happening. So that was a cool use of that technique, and animations can really add to that. Animations and transitions are very similar. Transitions are for changes between slides. I don't know if you've ever watched the old Star Wars movies, but when they switch scenes, there's these almost very PowerPoint-esque transitions between them. And I don't know, I know the Star Wars probably came first, and so I wonder if PowerPoint partially did it because they appreciated them so much, but it's a fun way to switch between things. And some work really well. Some are just over the top and ridiculous. Fall over is a very strange one. What you would do is for whichever slide you're transitioning into, you would click it, select the transition that you want to happen before before it, so what it's going to turn into. So here I would click reveal. Notice it has this little star now, and it gave me a preview of what that looks like. So if I click here, click the present, the little present mode here, and now I click a right arrow to go forward into the next slide, it'll add that transition animation into the slide. So this is kind of an interesting way of making slides more dynamic. But as I said, some are very silly. This one, I have not actually looked at Vortex. I imagine it's very peculiar. Yeah, that's exciting. I'd probably never use that one just because it's a little bit crazy. But I'm sure in the right context it would be beneficial. So those are that's one thing that you can do. But you can also do this to different elements within your presentation. So if we go to this main title slide, I could make a transition for just this title. And animations are a good way to do that right here. And if you're wondering and like, oh, we're almost out of time and I want to learn more about this, don't worry. One of our lessons will be just on animations because they're really dynamic, especially in 365. So what you can do is all of these are very much like the transitions we saw before, but they're the animations. So something that I think works pretty well with text is this fade in quality. And you can change these around a little bit. There's more by this drop down, and they do different things. You can make them move into the screen, move off the screen, move around the screen, all kinds of different things. You can make them bigger so that they stand out suddenly. All sorts of things. This zoom is pretty similar to that idea, but grow shrink is another way to do that. So what you can do is open this animation pane over here, and it pops up where that format bar normally does, and you can see the chart element, what the animation is, and what the text is in this case. Sometimes it'll name the shape if you're working with a shape or a picture. And you can adjust this to do different things, clicking this little drop down arrow. You can have it work with a click, so I have to click for it to show up, or I could have it happen as soon as whatever the previous feature is that occurs. So in this case, this is the start of a slide. So when the slideshow starts, that start of the slideshow is the first animation. And so it will start fading in that text at the same time that the presentation starts. So I could do that, and we'll see what that looks like. You can hit play from to get an idea of that. Slide appears and it fades in automatically. I don't have to click to make it show up. And you can change the timing too. Timing affects how long the animation takes. So this one is occurring for half a second. We can make that slower. We can make it just 1 second. And there you can see it's a little bit gentler as it fades in. And you can use this to different effects. I like doing it from this toolbar here, but you also get it up here as well. You can change the delay, so the slide will appear, it'll wait half a second, and then it'll fade in. I'll hit the play from, and you'll see it waited a moment, and then it faded in slowly. So that's another way to do that. You can do this with multiple pieces as well. Click fade in for this as well. This one will fade in a little bit faster, and we'll have this one start as soon as the other one's done. Start after previous. So we'll click before to the first one, hit play from, so it starts from the beginning, comes out, and then that comes out. So that's another way to make slides more dynamic, and there's tons of different ways to do this, and this is just kind of an overview of what we'll go into more in depth in the next couple classes. And one last thing that I obviously have not done, but if we were to set up those section headers, we'd right click, add section. Maybe this is part of some loop that we want to play at the beginning. We could set that up too. And that's under the slideshow option. What you could do is click on this section here, and we will click on this slide, and then from that selection, drag it into the slide itself. And I am in the wrong spot, so here I'll hit undo. Here we go. So from here, we can drag this. Yeah, it's not letting me do it. So we'll put it back where it goes, and I'll show you from the other way. It was working great this morning, and I don't know why it has changed its mind today. The other place to do this is from Insert. Oh, because I'm not in 365, that's why. As I said, these have changed a lot in the different versions. There's an option under Insert, under this link, where you create a zoomed in version of your slide. It makes an invisible link in the corner, and it allows you to access that from an automated loop. Say I was looping these first two slides. So something fair and weird is that oftentimes if you're trying to figure out how to do something, you'll have to use this tell me what you want to do bar or search on the internet to find out how to do the feature. And most people have tried most things, and there's pretty good directions on how to do this. I wish I had this set up on my other software, but here it will not let me do this, unfortunately. But if you were setting up that loop anyway, you would go to Slideshow, and what you would do is set up Slideshow. And from this little bar right here, this is our customizing setting. We could do presented by speaker full screen, kiosk full screen. It just depends on the format. But this is our looping option. Loop continuously until I hit escape. So now it'll just play that section up top on its own without me clicking anything. It'll just be on its own timer, doing it on its own. And it says use timings if present. And you can select which slides you want to be part of that. Here I could say just those first two. And this is where I'd need to put in a link of some kind so that I could switch to this next section without leaving the presentation. And that's the little component that I'm missing for PowerPoint 2016. But you can see what we'd do is we'd hit this present mode, it'll fade in. I think it's set up to switch over in 10 seconds. So we'll see where it goes. There we go. It's doing that crazy confetti transition to the next one. And then onwards it goes to the next one. So then I can hit escape and it'll stop looping that for me. So lots of different features. And today was definitely an overview. I want to respect everyone's time and not go over. But are there any questions about specific things that I kind of showed in this introduction that you'd like to learn a little more about? That we can.
I
Oh
just
yeah.
have one question right now. Mine doesn't have up at the top on the menu, I don't have developer. Is that
Oh,
just in a different version?
So developer is not a default category. What developer does, I'll just show you real quick, is it allows you to put in automated things. I've never actually used it myself. I've used it in Excel, um, not Excel, but Word, to automate how I want a, a document to be edited. But it allows you to put in these macros and these add-ins, and the add-ins are pretty useful. I don't have any. You'd have to access them from the store. But if you wanted that developer tab, you'd go to File and you would go to this Options button at the bottom.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yep. So here's where you can add that. Also, once again, the add-ins,
Oh,
um, the quick access toolbar. 365 has a lot of the different add-ins that are useful, whether it be 3D modeling or morphing. Those are really cool functions that are available through that. And let's see, where's here's customize ribbon, access toolbar. I think ribbon is where I had changed it. Yeah, here's developer, and this is where I had put that in. So
oh yeah.
I could reset it um, to go back to the default, or I could just hit OK after I'd put in whatever changes. And this is also where I put in that format painter as well. I like to be able to insert a picture and then apply the same formatting as another picture without having to go back to the home tab. I like to stay in that formatting tab. And so I had gone down to this format painter and hit add. It's already over there, so it's thrown up an error. But that's how I put this on the toolbar so that I can get to it from the top.
Perfect.
Hit
Thank
OK.
you.
Yeah. Oh, one more thing before we go. Do you have any other questions?
No, I'm good for now.
Okay. One last thing I was going to show was if you're looking at those themes under, here I'll go back, under the Design tab, Themes, something else that you can do to get a presentation started in a way that looks appealing to you and for what your project is at that new tab. The templates here are a little bit different than they are in a lot of the other Microsoft software. Microsoft Excel has some pretty elaborate templates, but presentations are so unique that they don't really have that as an option as well. There are some templates. There's even some guides to walk you through how to make a presentation, which is pretty cool. So if we just typed in how to, you would get all of these ideas about how to make a presentation. They kind of walk you through it. But they're not presentations really themselves necessarily. But if we go to that home, you see all of those themes that we looked at before, but you can click on themes themselves and you'll see even more. You can go through and scroll down, and it just goes on just about forever. And then within there, there's even more categories that you can choose on the right-hand side. So if you're looking at putting together some sort of holiday presentation, you can see, well, we'll delete that. We'll go to home. We'll type in holiday. Bloop. And now it's created all of these different icons and things that maybe you would use. A lot of people that I've seen use PowerPoint don't even use it for presentations, but will use it as an image processor. So they will make these cool different backgrounds and designs off of a PowerPoint presentation. If we were to open this up, I'll hit create. I think I got to go to a new share here. There we go. And you can see that it does give you this template where you can insert your own images and notes and things. But just another way of looking at these different graphics. And you can always copy all of this sort of graphic and move it into a Word document if this is maybe going to be the header of maybe a holiday newsletter for your family or something. So you can always use this as a way to just combine images and play with different designs too, without it being part of a bigger presentation. So here I'm gonna stop my share here. Any other questions before we head out?
Was that your baby?
No, no, that was not. That was definitely a stock photo baby.
Oh, okay. Maybe your eyes resembled each other.
Who knows? Maybe it's a distant relation.
There you go.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, Susan. Were you able to catch the beginning?
Yeah, I was you were on the second or third slide when I popped in. I'm sorry I was late.
Oh, no worries at all. I just wanted to know if you needed me to email you the recording. That's all.
I think that would always be useful. Yes, definitely.
Okay. It will be on our website, but also if you want to put your email in the chat, I'm happy to send it to you directly as well.
There you go.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm going to hit stop recording now.